My future daughter-in-law laughed when someone mocked my late husband in my house, at my dinner table. I had just finished setting down a plate of roasted chicken when one of her friends, someone I had met maybe twice before, made a snide remark about how my husband Mark used to always act like the hero in every story Adam told. It wasn't even a clever joke, it was a cheap comment, one that revealed far more about the speaker than about the man they were mocking. I turned my eyes to Clara, expecting her to shut it down, or at the very least show a shred of discomfort. Instead, she burst out laughing. It was sharp, loud, and worse, she added to it. "He probably wore that title like a cape," she said, smirking. Then she looked around the room like she expected others to join in. Some did, most didn't. I stayed silent, setting down the last dish on the table, but something in me had shifted. Not a slow realization, a snap. I knew right then that this wedding couldn't happen, that I wasn't just dealing with a thoughtless girl. I was watching someone reveal who they truly were. People think it takes time to recognize betrayal, but sometimes it only takes a laugh. "I'm Helen. I'm 52. I lost my husband 7 years ago, and I raised our son alone. I thought I was about to welcome a daughter into our family. I was wrong. Here's how everything fell apart. My name is Helen, and I live alone in the lakeside house Mark and I bought when Adam was still in elementary school. It's quiet here, peaceful. We moved in right before the market boom, so we were lucky. After Mark passed, I never thought about selling it. Not because I couldn't, but because every room still holds part of him. The porch swing he hung by hand, the kitchen table we bought second-hand and refinished together, the old bookshelf he built on a Sunday afternoon and never got around to staining. After the accident, I used to sit on the porch with a cup of tea and pretend he'd come walking up the path like he always did, mud on his boots, a grin on his face, and something sweet from the bakery he swore he only stopped at because it was on the way home. He was that kind of man, good, quiet, steady, the kind who didn't raise his voice unless someone was being cruel, and even then, only once. He was helping a neighbor fix a roof when it happened. A fall, a freak accident. No one to blame, no one to hold accountable. Just a silence that settled in and never fully left. Adam was in his second year of college then. He took it hard. We both did. But I held the line for both of us. I went back to work a week later, finished paying off the mortgage, started teaching a financial planning course at the community center on weekends. It gave me structure, and more than that, it let me help people, the way Mark always had. Years passed. Adam graduated, started his career in design, moved to the city. He'd visit every other weekend, always texting first, always asking if I needed anything. I didn't. But I appreciated that he asked. When he told me about Clara, I saw something shift in him. He lit up when he talked about her, said she was smart, funny, driven. She worked in digital marketing, came from a well-connected family, and had a smile that, according to Adam, could win over anyone. I told him I'd love to meet her, and I meant it. I was ready to open the next chapter, ready to welcome someone new into the family. The first time Clara came to visit, she brought wine, complimented the garden, called me Miss Helen with this overly careful politeness that made me wonder if she was nervous or just rehearsed. I told myself not to judge too quickly. I've seen enough people wear social masks to know some just take longer to show who they really are. Over time, she relaxed. Or maybe I just got used to the act. She started calling me Helen, dropped the small talk, and seemed to genuinely want to be included. But there were moments, fleeting, easy-to-dismiss things. She made a face when I showed her Mark's old workshop, said things like, "Wow, you really kept everything," or, "That's so sentimental." I brushed it off. Not everyone holds on to things the way I do. When Adam proposed, he did it at the lake, same spot where Mark used to take him fishing. Clara said yes. He sent me the video. I cried, not because I was losing a son, but because I thought I was gaining a daughter. Things shifted subtly after the engagement, nothing dramatic, just changes that felt too small to call out but too strange to ignore. Clara started taking the lead on every conversation about the wedding, which on the surface made sense. She worked in marketing, she knew how to plan, she liked to be organized. But the tone was different. She didn't ask Adam what he wanted. She told him. He'd mention wanting a small ceremony near the lake, and she'd quickly say that was too rustic for the guest list. When he brought up having a photo of his father at the ceremony, maybe at the welcome table, she rolled her eyes. Isn't that a bit of a downer? I mean, weddings are supposed to be happy, right? She said it with a laugh like it was an innocent comment, but it stuck with me. I didn't say anything to her that day. I just looked at Adam. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, still in love but pulled in directions he didn't quite understand. I started noticing other things too. She never asked about my life, not in a rude way, just with total disinterest. When she and Adam visited, she scrolled through her phone during dinner. She complimented dishes with phrases like, "This is very homey," and never offered to help clean up. Again, none of it was outright disrespect, but it built, like water dripping on stone. I invited them to dinner one evening, nothing fancy, just roast chicken, vegetables, a little wine. Adam helped set the table. Clara came in late, said she was on a call. When she sat down, she looked around and said, "I can't believe this table is still here. Didn't Mark build it himself?" I smiled and nodded. "He did, sanded it by hand." She smirked. "Looks it." I watched Adam stiffen, but he didn't say anything. I didn't either. I just noted it. A week later, I overheard her talking to Adam in the garden. She was laughing. "Babe, I know she means well, but your mum really lives in the past. I don't think she's ready to move on." Adam didn't respond, at least not loudly enough for me to hear. But Clara's tone didn't shift. She went on about how maybe it was time to freshen things up around here, how the house could use a redesign, how the wedding would be a good excuse to finally update the aesthetic. The house wasn't cluttered, it was carefully kept, clean. But yes, Mark's presence was everywhere, on purpose, not as a shrine, but as a part of our story. I started pulling back, letting them plan the wedding their way. I stopped offering suggestions. I didn't talk about Mark unless Adam brought him up. I waited. I wanted to believe it was just immaturity or nerves, that Clara would settle into her role and understand what kind of family she was joining. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right, and I knew I'd have to act. I just didn't know when, not yet. It happened during a casual dinner I hosted about a month before the wedding. Nothing formal, just family and a few of Adam and Clara's friends. I'd cooked what Mark used to call our Sunday meal, roast chicken, garlic potatoes, green beans, and his favourite lemon tart for dessert. It was comforting food, meant to bring people together. The dining room was full of soft conversation and clinking glasses. I was setting down the last dish when one of Clara's friends, a woman named Nina, made a remark that stopped me cold. "So, Mark was the classic overachiever dad, huh?" she said with a laugh, looking around for agreement. "The type who gives advice even when no one's asking." The room fell into that awkward silence where people aren't sure whether to laugh or change the subject. Clara didn't hesitate. She laughed, loud and clear, then added, "He probably wore that title like a cape. But hey, he did a good job with Adam at least." Then she sipped her wine, completely unfazed. I stood frozen beside the table. I looked at Adam, hoping, praying he would say something. He didn't. His eyes were down, his hands stiff around his fork. I wanted to believe he was just shocked, that he didn't know what to say. But silence in moments like that says more than words ever could. I didn't explode. I didn't make a scene. I finished pouring the wine. I smiled when someone passed me a plate, but inside something was breaking. Not from pain, though it hurt more than I'll ever admit, but from clarity. That moment was the final confirmation of what I'd already suspected. Clara didn't just lack respect for Mark's memory. She actively dismissed it. She minimized his life to a punchline. She used his absence as a backdrop for her performance. It wasn't just tasteless, it was cruel. After dessert, people drifted into the living room. I stayed behind to clear plates. Adam came in after a while. He said nothing at first. Then softly he asked, "You okay?" I looked at him and nodded. "Just tired," I said. He stood there awkwardly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Then he said, "Clara didn't mean anything. You know how she jokes." I gave him a long look. "Do you think it was funny?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but I don't think she realized how it came across." I wanted to scream. Instead, I said nothing. I dried my hands and told him to get some rest. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her voice in my head, that laugh, that smirk, that casual dismissal of a man who spent his life helping others who had literally died while helping someone. I sat by the fireplace and looked at the photo of Mark we kept on the mantel, the one where he's smiling at Adam, hand on his shoulder, the lake behind them glowing gold in the sunset. I whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't stop her sooner." Because I knew then she couldn't be part of this family, not if that's how she treated the people who built it. The next morning I didn't confront anyone. I didn't send a dramatic text or demand an apology. Instead, I made coffee, opened my notebook, and began writing everything down. Dates, comments, things Clara had said and done, some small, some cutting, all adding up. I pulled out the wedding binder she had left behind during one of her visits and flipped through the pages. There were detailed budgets, guest lists, venue agreements, and something that stopped me cold. A printed draft of a post-marriage asset transfer document. It was marked as a sample, but Clara had annotated it. Notes in the margins read, "Adam's name only, and if Helen moves out after the wedding, repurpose lake property?" My heart pounded as I read the page again and again. I checked my email history, then quietly reviewed my own property documents. Everything was still in my name, but Adam had access. I'd given it to him years ago, when I was hospitalized briefly for surgery. I trusted him, I still do. But Clara? I began to question everything. That evening I called my attorney, a longtime friend who had helped settle Mark's estate. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but when I told him what was going on, his tone shifted immediately. "You're not being paranoid," he said. "You're being smart. Let's go over every document together." Over the next few days, I scanned and organized everything. I visited the bank, double-checked my beneficiaries, and removed Adam's name from any accounts Clara might try to influence. It wasn't about punishment. It was about prevention. I wasn't about to let a girl who mocked my husband walk into our lives and dismantle what he and I built. Meanwhile, I watched Clara, observed. She seemed unaware. In fact, she appeared more comfortable than ever coordinating tastings, sending floral options, making jokes about how she'd renovate the house once she and Adam took over. She said it with a smile, but it wasn't a joke. I could see it in her eyes. She thought I was already fading into the background, that I'd just step aside, grateful to be included in wedding photos, that I'd quietly hand over the keys to my home, my son, and the legacy of the man she laughed at. I smiled back, of course. I agreed when she suggested moving the rehearsal dinner to my home instead of the restaurant. It would be cozier, she said, more personal. I nodded and said, of course. That night, I poured a glass of wine, lit a candle beside Mark's photo, and said quietly, "She has no idea what's coming." Because I wasn't just going to stop this wedding. I was going to end it in a way that made sure everyone in that room saw her for who she truly was. Not with drama, not with accusations, but with truth. Cold, clean, undeniable. Let her laugh then. The day of the rehearsal dinner arrived with a breeze just cool enough to rustle the lake water and stir the lavender I had planted near the porch steps. I'd spent the morning preparing dishes. I knew Adam loved chicken with rosemary, roasted carrots, fresh sourdough rolls. The backyard was set with warm lights strung above the long wooden table Mark and I had built 20 years ago. Clara had approved everything, of course. "It's quaint," she had said the day before, "but it'll do." Guests began arriving around 6. Clara floated through the crowd like a hostess in her element, kissing cheeks, clinking glasses, directing the placement of wine bottles with the ease of someone already convinced this family was hers to manage. Adam was quieter. He stayed close to her but kept glancing over at me. I could see he sensed something, maybe not the storm, but the shift in pressure before it. After dinner, when everyone was full and sipping their second glass of wine, Clara stood up. "I just want to say thank you to Helen," she began, raising her glass. "She's been so generous with her home and her time. I know how hard it must be to let go of the past, but we're building something new, and I'm honored to be part of that future." There was a light round of applause. I didn't move. Then one of Clara's college friends chimed in from the other side of the table. "You're basically renovating his entire life," she said, laughing. "Next step, replacing the furniture and the legacy." I looked at Clara. Her mouth twitched into a smile. She said, "One piece at a time," and raised her glass again. That was it. That was the moment. I stood up calmly, with no anger in my face, just certainty. I looked directly at Clara. "No," I said clearly, "you are not part of this family. And there will be no wedding." The air went still. Chairs didn't creak. Forks didn't move, just silence. Clara blinked, then forced a laugh. "Helen, don't be dramatic." I didn't look away. "This isn't drama. This is clarity. You mocked my husband. You made plans behind my back. You laughed when your friend joked about erasing the legacy of the man who built the very table you're sitting at." I turned slightly, addressing the whole table now. 7 years ago, I lost my husband, but I didn't lose my mind, or my memory, or my standards. I've watched this girl dismiss the life Mark and I built. I've listened to her tell Adam what to think, where to live, how to spend, and I said nothing, because I trusted she'd grow into this family. But what I've seen is someone who thinks she's better than the people she's marrying into, someone who laughs at sacrifice, who sees love as something to repaint and flip for profit. I turned back to Clara. Her smile was gone. "This wedding is off. I won't let Mark's name be dragged into a family that doesn't respect him. I won't let Adam be taken in by someone who sees kindness as weakness and memory as clutter." Clara stood up now, voice rising. "You can't do this. It's not your call. Adam and I—" "Adam," I said gently, "you can still marry whoever you want. But you won't do it with my name on the invitations or my house in the background." I looked him in the eye. "And if you marry her, you'll be choosing a life where silence means agreement, where legacy means nothing, and I won't be part of that." Adam's face was pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Clara grabbed his arm. "Say something!" she hissed. He didn't, not then, not for a long moment. He just looked at me, at the table, at Clara. Then he pulled his arm away. The guests started murmuring. A few looked down. One of Clara's friends stood up, awkwardly saying they had to leave early. I didn't sit back down. I walked inside, calm, steady, my heart thudding but not broken. I'd done what needed to be done. The wedding was over. She just didn't know it yet. The days that followed were filled with silence from Clara and too much noise from everyone else. I woke up to dozens of missed calls and texts, some from Adam, some from people I didn't recognize, others from Clara's mother, who had no problem using phrases like inappropriate, humiliating, and completely out of line. I didn't respond, not right away. I waited. On the third day, Adam showed up at my door. He didn't call first, just knocked. I opened the door and stepped aside. He walked in, stood in the middle of the kitchen, and finally said, "She told me you twisted everything, that you were jealous, that you hated her." I didn't interrupt. I let him finish. But then I remembered what she said that night, and I realized, "You didn't twist anything, you just said it out loud." I nodded once. "So," he asked, "what now?" I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the property documents, bank statements, and printouts of Clara's annotated wedding notes, including her asset transfer plan. Adam flipped through the pages slowly. When he finished, he just whispered, "Damn." Then he rubbed his eyes. "How did I not see this?" I shook my head. "Because you were in love, and because she was good at hiding it, until she didn't care to hide anymore." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and asked, "Did you ever like her?" I thought about lying, about softening the blow, but I didn't. I tried harder than you'll ever know, but she didn't want a mother-in-law. She wanted silence, she wanted access. She didn't want to be part of this family, she wanted to remake it. He nodded slowly. She kept asking about the house, if I thought you'd move after the wedding. She said it would be easier to start fresh if the house was sold. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He knew. A week later, the wedding was officially cancelled. Vendors were called, guests were informed, deposits were lost. Clara moved out of the apartment they shared and sent a single message. "I hope you're happy. You embarrassed me in front of everyone." Adam didn't respond. He moved back home temporarily, took the guest room, and helped me repaint the hallway. We didn't talk much about Clara. Not because we were avoiding it, but because there wasn't anything left to say. I got a letter from Clara's mother a few days later. It was handwritten and smelled faintly of expensive perfume. It said, in carefully looped script, that she was deeply disappointed in my behaviour, and that I had ruined a perfectly good match due to an inability to move on from grief. I folded the letter once and slid it into the fireplace. Mark would have laughed, and I did too. A short, quiet laugh that came from somewhere deep in my ribs. The kind that tastes like relief, not happiness, just the end of a storm. The following weekend I hosted dinner again. Nothing big, just Adam, my sister, and 2 friends. We set the table like always, used Mark's old wine glasses, played the playlist he made for our 25th anniversary. When we sat down, Adam lifted his glass. "To Dad," he said, "to legacy, and to seeing people clearly even when it hurts." We clinked glasses. No one said Clara's name. No one had to. She had already disappeared, not just from our lives, but from the story we were still writing, one where Mark still mattered, one where I still had a voice, one where laughter came from a place of love, not mockery. The months after the cancelled wedding were quiet in the best possible way. Adam stayed with me longer than he planned. At first I think he needed the comfort, but after a while it just felt natural. We fell into a rhythm we hadn't shared since he was in high school mornings with coffee on the porch, quiet dinners, the occasional evening walk by the lake. He helped me repaint the old guest room, the one Clara once dismissed as too cluttered to use. We cleared out what needed clearing, kept what mattered, and turned it into something new, a reading room with floor cushions, soft light, and a shelf of Mark's favourite books. It didn't feel like moving on. It felt like choosing what to carry forward. One afternoon in late spring, I received an invitation to speak at a local community forum. They were organising a panel on legacy, grief, and generational strength. I wasn't sure why they thought of me until the organiser said, "People talk about what you did, the way you stood up for your husband's memory. We think others need to hear that kind of clarity." I hesitated at first. I wasn't someone who sought attention, but I thought about Mark, about how often he stepped in quietly when no one else would. And I said yes. The day of the panel, I stood in front of a room of strangers and spoke for the first time about what happened. I didn't name Clara. I didn't need to. I talked about how love doesn't end when someone dies, how silence in the face of disrespect is still a choice, and how protecting the living sometimes means defending the dead. Afterward, several women approached me. Some had tears in their eyes. One said, "You reminded me that my voice still matters." That night I sat on the porch with a cup of tea staring at the darkened lake, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not because the pain was gone, but because I'd honoured it. A few months later, Adam met someone new. Her name was Rachel. She worked in education, loved dogs, and didn't blink when she saw the photo of Mark on our mantel. The first time she visited, she brought a lavender plant from her garden. "I heard you love these," she said simply. I smiled, not because she was perfect, but because she saw what mattered. This time, I didn't hold my breath. I didn't watch for red flags. I watched for respect, for kindness, for sincerity. And Rachel didn't disappoint. She didn't try to fill a space. She just sat beside it. Adam didn't rush. He learned from what came before, and I could see it in his eyes, the quiet strength Mark had passed to him, now settling into its own shape. I didn't need to rebuild my life. It had never broken. It had just needed protecting, and I had done that not through rage, not through revenge, but through resolve, quiet, steady, unshaken, just like the man who built the foundation I still stand on. One morning, nearly a year after the rehearsal dinner that never became a wedding, I found myself watering the lavender Rachel had brought. It had taken root beside the porch, just beneath the swing Mark installed all those years ago. The air smelled of early summer, soft and bright and full of things quietly growing. I sat down on the swing with my tea and looked out at the lake. The same view Mark loved, the same water that had reflected every version of our life, young parents, long evenings, hard winters, and now this new chapter, quieter but no less meaningful. In the distance, I heard Rachel laughing with Adam near the shed. They were trying to assemble a canoe rack, failing terribly, but without frustration. Just laughter, real laughter, not at someone, not to mask discomfort, but the kind that comes when people feel safe. I smiled and leaned back, letting the sun warm my face. I thought about what people assume strength looks like. Loud voices, big scenes, dramatic exits. But I've learned that real strength lives in the quiet moments, in the decisions you make when no one is watching, in the truths you say once and never again. Some people thought I was cruel for ending a wedding days before it happened. Some said I should have waited. Others never reached out at all. That's fine. They weren't there when she laughed. They didn't hear the sound that turned my stomach. They didn't see the way Adam lowered his eyes or the way Mark's name was used like a prop. But I did, and I acted, not out of bitterness, not to make a scene, but because silence would have meant consent, because I promised Mark that I would raise our son to know what love should look like and what it should never tolerate. Some people leave legacies through monuments, others through money. Mark left his through moments, through the kind of man he was. The kind of man I made sure Clara would never rewrite. So if you're ever in doubt, if someone ever disrespects the people who shaped you, remember this: you don't owe them a seat at your table. You don't owe them your silence. You owe them nothing. And to those who've been betrayed, mocked, or made to feel like their memories are a burden, know this: you are not broken. You are the keeper of something they will never understand, and sometimes the best way to protect it is to end everything quietly, firmly, finally.